Thank you, John. And if I do fall asleep, just leave me, y'all. Well, first of all, I want to extend my appreciation to Florida College being able to talk about this. It's been 37 years of our life we've been overseas, my wife and I. And so what I wanted to do is not just talk about India, not just talk about the 20 years that we spent in Germany and England, and not the time that we spent in Seychelles. We've gone several trips there. But I want to talk about some similarities about this work and make some application of some unexpected lessons learned. The first time that I got on an airplane was in 1977 when I was leaving Tulsa, Oklahoma, coming to Florida College. And so that's the first time I got on an airplane, and it has not stopped. But I lived going back and forth between Texas and Oklahoma, crossing the Great Red Wiggle several times. And after Florida College, I went to University of Arkansas, actually, where I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. My brother Craig and Joetta were there, and so I went to be with them. And then I met a guy named Ed Harrell. I had heard of him, and he was a professor there at the University of Arkansas, and then I met his daughter. Well, I graduated. We moved to Texas A&M. I got an engineering degree, and we went to college, from College Station, Texas to Fort Hood. Started as a civil engineer there and working, and I was happy. Here we are, just working. We had 2 kids and completely content. One time I brought home a bulletin, and on the back of it, a bulletin from the Corps of Engineers, it had all these jobs that were listed in overseas areas. And Liz said, how do we go there? How can we go to Japan? So I flipped it over, and I thought, well, these are probably not for me. They're probably for somebody else. Well, just ask. So I asked, and we ended up in Würzburg, Germany. The recruiters, when I called them, they said, don't ask and don't send in your resume if you don't want to move. So what I want to do is talk more about people going overseas in a secular job and having the responsibility, feeling the responsibility, and actually making it a reality of working with churches. There's been so many times that we've talked to people in the past trying to get them to come and working with our churches, and they will always say, well, it's not time in their life. We're about to have a baby. I try to explain to them that Germans have babies too. And then they say, well, they're in school now. I try to explain to them that as well. And then they have grandkids, and then before you know it, the time has gone. It is an open field all over, not just the areas to where we were, but it is an open field to where a lot of people can do a lot of good. So we got to Germany, and I don't want to say the rest is history because that's what this is about. This is our path for 37 years of working with churches, knowing that we have other jobs. So as we go through, I want to look first at the 4 different areas, the 4 different areas where we did, what our role was in that. And then after that, if you'll give me a little bit of grace period, I do want to make fun of all of our cultures, including the U.S., because I want to make the point that there is a difference in cultures. And understanding the difference in cultures will help you be effective in the teaching. And so I want to look at the differences of the cultures, and it is funny, to Americans and about Americans and all of us. And then I want to find out one common denominator, and I'll just go ahead and spill the beans. It is the gospel. Sin is sin. Truth is truth, but souls are souls. And if you go over there and you're looking for a vacation, you can do that. Actually, life over there in Europe, we could have stayed forever because it is just not the fast pace that the Americans have, except on the Autobahn. But that's the only place. So if you'll bear with me as we walk through some of these, I just want to tell the history of where we were. So in Germany, I worked with the U.S. government, the Corps of Engineers, for 17 years, actually with Corps of Engineers, and then I worked with the Department of Defense school system. And so those are the years that we did. From 1988 to 2003, we were in Europe. You'll see we went to England during that time. We came back and went to Annandale and Washington, D.C., and then came back and finished my career out in 2012, 2007 in Germany. But when we first got there in 1988, it was just over 40 years since World War II had ended. Germany was in shambles still. I mean, the Germans picked everything up. I can't imagine what Italy looked like, but the Germans had picked everything up, and it was pretty clean. But you saw remnants of the Second World War. We worked in a caserne. Caserne is a military installation called the Fallenberg Caserne in Würzburg, and the Americans called it the Fallen Down Caserne because there were demolished buildings. You stepped over rubble even during that time. So it was an exciting time. But what's interesting, in 1988, in West Germany, it contained over 400,000 U.S. troops and civilians and all of their dependents. And then in 1989, you may remember, the wall came down and it changed everything. We were a bit frustrated because we wanted to stay in Europe for a while, and this peace thing seemed to be really taking off. And so, but troops drew down. And so it drew down to about 250,000, that looks like a 60,000 troops. It wasn't German. I think I accidentally typed that. So the areas where we were, we were looking for a church. So when we first come over, when we had this idea that we were going to work with a German church, didn't know much about the military over there. And so we searched for a local national congregation. We worked with a group for not very long, a couple of weeks. It was a German congregation that had Americans. The German congregation that we worked with, we didn't know the language. It was very encouraging. But when the Americans were there, it was just a disrespect. It was when I say an institutional group, they were the farthest thing from their mind, it seemed, was a reverence. And so it didn't take Liz and I very long to decide that we're going to start our own work. So that'll be a point that we talk about later on. So we redirected our focus. Our focus went from local national Germans to these hundreds of thousands of Americans. And this is just in Germany. This isn't all in Europe. So 400,000 troops with family members in all these communities. We were at Würzburg, which over in the Bavaria area, then Bitburg over on the west side, then near Frankfurt, we were in Mainz. And so now what there is some congregations now as a result of the congregation that was started in Mainz. Würzburg and Bitburg, we began those two congregations. In Mainz, it was a congregation that actually Colleen and Greg Engel from this college area, they had been in Mainz and started the work there. And although we didn't worship with them, I think we exchanged keys. But the Mainz congregation grew to, now it's Darmstadt. It's completely self-sufficient. The picture up at the top is my sister-in-law, Lee. She's the one in the purple, if you can't tell. But what we were able to do is see, working with these German congregations, and the German congregations had very little German. What we found out was it was the Americans, it was all Africans, it was people from South America and those areas. Those are the ones that were interested in the gospel. So what we did is we went to Germany to work with churches with no Germans. Now I think there's 2 or 3, and there are some good congregations that are German, but we work with the English-speaking. And we also found out that it was significant work just to work with the Americans. The next place was England. We worked for 3 years. It was interesting. When the wall came down, and it seemed like I was losing my job. And so I was offered a job in Lawton, Oklahoma, or London, England. My mom, being from Tulsa, did not think there was a choice. She thought it would be very easy. My in-laws thought it was not going to be a hard decision either. So we went to London instead of Lawton. But this was a different part in our life. It was still working with overseas congregations. But this was the break that we needed. Although when we were in Germany, and I'll mention this, there were some American preachers over there that we connected to and depended on. One of them was Steve and Mary Wallace. I mean, they were there. They were such a huge impact on our lives when we were there. And it was great to have them there. When we got to London, Matt Qualls was still there, Jim Jonas was preaching, and then David Cambridge, his name actually was Glenn at the time, but David Cambridge. And so what we used this time was a time to where we just were rejuvenized. We were 3 years, and again, the lessons learned in a second that we'll talk about. It wore us out. We were not expecting to do what we did. The first 3 years in Germany, we needed this break. So 3 years in London was a blessing for all kinds of reasons. We had just moved, so I didn't have any pictures. Of course, this was before digital area. And so the only picture I could find is this is a group of, you may know some of these, the Jonas kids. This is Jeremy Hudson. This is Lucy Hudson right here. We just had a Easter egg hunt. That's the only picture that I could find in my electronic files. So the congregation had about 35 members. But what was interesting about it, it had at least 10 different cultures. And that's one thing, again, that we were not expecting, is all the different cultures and how to deal with those different nationalities and cultures. Our biggest challenge was just getting to services. And we talk about it. We drove in to downtown London. Back then you could drive. And sometimes it would take us an hour and a half to get there. And we just tell our kids' teachers that Thursday morning they may not have their homework. That's not important. What's important that they learn to get to services. But we searched out different ways of reaching souls in the cities, and they called it letterboxing. So we would go letterboxing, or passing out letters in their mailboxes. And then the area of India. And again, I've highlighted this area of a secular job. Because Brother Harold didn't go over there. A lot of people didn't know that he was not a full-time preacher. But he went over there in a secular job, and he found preachers and help establish congregations. I've traveled now 23 times. We just got back a week ago, and it was a very, very encouraging trip. It's against the law for us to go into Germany and to proselyte. So what we do is we go on a tourist visa, and we just happen to be teaching, and we just happen to be teaching the Bible. This time we had over 600 Christians that attended our classes and all of our gospel meetings that we had. Very encouraging. And the work that we're doing, and we're not the only work that's in India. We just do a section of it. And I don't have any details about the India work here other than this. But there are 40 different individuals or congregations that support our work in India. And so we go over there and we interview anywhere from 100 to 120 different preachers, recommend their support, and work with the congregations and individuals for their support. So here's Brother Surrender. He's here. He's one of our translators. Tom is over here interviewing. This is a huge part of our work. You know John Weaver. That was just taken a week or so ago. And then during the summer when we go, because the Indians are still, I don't have it here. I have it on another slide. The Indians, to have the women teachers at this point is not as accepted in other cultures. And so what we've done in the past, my wife Liz and others have gone over and taught some ladies' classes, but it seems to be distracting from our efforts with the Indians when we go with our January trip. And one of the reasons is because a lot of the Indians still do not feel that is scriptural, that is a good way to use the women, especially traveling around and doing these classes. So what we do is we work, we come, I won't go into the money issue of trying to get money in, but we come in June, and during June we go to the congregations that encourage the women classes. And so this was taken last year in a town called Madurai, and this is my wife Liz in the middle and her sister Lee. The last area we'll look at is in the Seychelles. And Robert Smith, and again, Robert and Andrea Smith moved there in the mid-1990s, and he went again in a secular job. And so, without going through a lot of detail, some of you may know the story, but Robert went, and I don't know, I can't remember the Ministry of Fun, I'll call it, I don't know. But he went to this area within the government in Seychelles, and it's not a huge country. And he just said, if I build a basketball team that'll compete nationally, will you give me a house and a car? And they said, sure. And as a result of that, the very first converts that were all of these basketball players. When we went over in 1998, the first time I went, I saw the congregation was just full of 18, 19-year-old men, and that's where he converted. So the island is 15 miles long and 5 miles wide, and that's it. About 80 to 90% of their whole population lives on this island. There's 2 other islands in there to where they live, but this is the main island that they live. So when Jimmy Petrus came to Florida College, we helped get him to Florida College. When he got here, I remember him explaining that, he said, well, you're in Florida. I said, yeah. And he said, well, when I get to Florida, I'll come, not me, I mean Ed. He told Ed, he said, well, I'll go see Ed up in Jacksonville. And I said, okay. And I said, well, how are you going to get there? He goes, well, I'll walk. And he just could not put in his head how big this America was. So Liz and I took him to the local library. We got a picture of Seychelles and saw on a dimension and got it, and we went to the city of Jacksonville, which is large in itself, and saw about 6 different lengths of his country would go to the west, and then we backed it up to Jacksonville. But he learned how much it is. So at this point, it is a huge congregation there, and one of the points I'm going to say at the end is they're desperate for people to communicate with them, and they're doing such a great job. This young man right here, his name's Bryce. We're trying to get him in the next year and a half, trying to get him to Florida College. He's trying to come as well. So that's the 4 different swim lanes. Now I want to talk about a little diversity. I'll summarize it, I guess. Germany moved there. It was a secular job. They follow the rules. They're clean. I can't overemphasize the cleanliness of Germany, and they have predefined customer service, and we'll talk about that. In England, it's all about protocol and authoritative reverence. And all of these things show up not only in their culture, but it shows up in their worship services. They're complicated, extremely wordy, the British. They're polite, and they know that realistic about themselves. India, again, a secular job. They have perfected chaos with English bureaucracy. But it works. It really works. Their customer service can't be compared to any others, I don't believe, that I have been associated with. And when you walk off the plane, all 5 of your senses just explode. You're ready to go. And Seychelles, again, they have some clear physical and spiritual boundaries, which is an advantage. If you say, sometimes, and I've been in working with congregations, they say, we are going to go and we're going to take this section of Jacksonville and we're going to go out and send out letters. Seychelles, they say, we're going to take this section of our whole country and do it. So it's the boundaries are very easy. They do have a 3rd generation Christian at this point, so it's interesting. Okay, so let me look at some of the differences when you take these cultures and you clash. This is an Indian intersection. There is no wreck here. Nobody's bumpers hit anybody's bumpers. A lot of horn honking, but it works. This is Germany. And by the way, they're going 130 miles an hour. And so it's interesting, Surinder, who's here, told me that in 2011, the Indian government asked the German government to come and to do a study on traffic to turn this to that. And so at the end, if I am correct, Surinder, the way you described, I looked all over the internet. Even if I didn't know German, I was going to have it translated. I thought that would be a really good report. So in the end, the Germans left, and they concluded that there's more wrecks if you try that in India than if you just let them go. And the traffic is going everywhere on every, it's against the law in Germany to honk your horn. Actually, it says that you shall not honk your horn unless it's a dire emergency. You don't just sit out and honk to let somebody, let you know that you're there. You don't honk your horn when people are going through a roundabout. You don't honk your horn. It is against the law. You would be run over in India if you didn't hear the horn honk. And I was working one time there, and my boss back in Germany, I was talking to him as we were going to a gospel meeting. We were going to Ballinager one night, and it's just chaos on the street. And so my boss said, wow, are you in a wreck or something? I said, no, This is Indian traffic. Everybody's honking their horns. The signage is a little bit different. This is in India. And encourage them to slow down. They could park there. There's also construction. These are hilarious in England. This one evidently is camouflaged in such a way that only a few people, maybe only a few people are able to see that. They love their roundabouts. This one right here, the magic roundabout. And so it's a roundabout and 5 different roundabouts within the roundabout. There's signs. This is a sign in England. This sign is not in use. But it's not just dedicated to the Americans. This was a sign in America. So the point of all this is there are different cultures. And the English, this isn't funny at all. They don't know why you're laughing at this. And this, and then this one. I guess I don't think you need a sign there. And then understanding the German culture, all you need is this sign. If you're familiar with German driving, they have different times about you can have this speed limit or this speed limit. This sign means end of all regulation. No, just go. And so that is the German signage. So when you get to the greeting part and the services, the Germans all greet you every time you meet with a handshake. They say your last name, you say their last name. And then they end and you shake hands, you say their last name, and they say their last name. In Seychelles, which caused a little problem with our kids when they were in high school, they went over to Seychelles with us and worked for about a month. Everybody kisses everybody. It doesn't matter what time you come into the services, you come in, and all these young Seychellois were kissing my daughter on both cheeks, and the young ladies were kissing my son. They liked going to services quite a bit. But that is a different culture. In India, you don't do that. In India, you don't touch, or you don't extend your hand to welcome them. They will extend their hand. When you take pictures, there's a lot of pictures of us in some of these. Well, that's the greeting. I wasn't ready for that, but that's all right. But in a lot of the pictures that you see with us, we're standing next to the women, and we are having our distance. If there is a closeness of it, it's because the women have gotten closer to it. So you need to understand all of these cultures, and they make a huge difference. I'll say really quickly, the English and their customer service, I'll say it very quickly. We were coming home one time after Wednesday night services and drove up next to take our kids home, and we drove by another American house in our neighborhood, and we saw that the door was knocked in. And so I told Liz, I said, well, it looks like they left their door open. So Liz went in and stayed and took the kids in bed, and I went over to their house and saw what was wrong. The door had been knocked down. They had been burglarized. So anyway, I'll make this a very short version of this. I finally got to the right dispatcher. They didn't have a 911 call because they didn't want to have 3 numbers because the British thought that people would accidentally call them. So it was a jingle that was associated with it. It got really complicated. Finally got the guy on the phone after 15 minutes, and he said, okay, what is your call about? I said, well, our neighbor here had his house burglarized. And he stopped me. This is England. He goes, burglarized. Burglarized. Why do you Yanks take a perfectly good noun and turn it into a verb. Liz was on pins and needles looking, saying, what did he say? I'm getting an English lesson, Anyway. But as soon as we got the right verbiage and all that, it came back. And the Bobbies were there right on track. The Germans, we don't have a lot of time, but they are not customer-oriented. I don't have time to talk about the satellite dish. But it's, we had some friends, Ken and Sharon Craig were living in Holland at the time, and they would come see us. And I remember one time they had some friends. We opened the door, and this teenage girl flew past us. I'd never met her, and she looked and said, you live in a stupid country. We were living in Germany, so I looked at Ken. I said, what happened? He said, well, she ordered ice cream in a cup. And so Germans don't deviate. You don't deviate. This potato goes with that meat. They just don't deviate. We don't have time for all of this, but that's where. Then you get over to the worship service. This is not a quartet. The way that the Indians lead singing, there's multiple song leaders, 2, sometimes 4, sometimes 5, and but this picture here is Tom preaching here, and the men are on one side and the women are on the other side. And so understanding all these cultures make a big difference. In the prayer service, the different cultures have a different view and idea about that. When we were living in London, it was at least 10 different nationalities. The British stand to show reverence. The Africans are prostrate on the ground. And so there's a difference in a prayer service, and you can see all these different nationalities coming together, and it's very interesting. And if the point of all this is understanding that you're not coming over to make them Americans. That's one of the biggest problems I think that we have. We come in there and we see the way that they're partaking of the Lord's Supper or the way that they're doing this, and we want to correct them. We want to give them hymn books. I think Steve Wolfgang talked about a story of someone coming in and giving the Czech Republic an American hymn book. Have you heard their hymns? I mean, listen to the Indians and the hymns that they sing. It's just phenomenal. But that's the different cultures. So I do have 10 minutes, and I'm going to finish up by talking about the lessons learned that we have. The first point is, I made this at the beginning, God's plan of salvation is for everyone. And sin is sin. And so when you're going over there and adapting, you don't tolerate sin. You work and take God's word, understanding what it was, and then talk within the culture that it says. Truth is truth, but souls are souls. And I took these pictures up here because all dads are the same. This was just last week in Mumbai. This dad got his 2 sons together to take pictures of this. And so they're all saying this is a Seychelles congregation, and there always is a young child acting up. And so you see, so everybody's the same. So let's look at the unexpected lessons. And so these unexpected lessons that I'm talking about is there was a view that we thought when we moved to Germany of what it was going to be like and what our world was going to be like. I was 29. Liz was 26. And so when we came over, we were not expecting to start a work. And so a lot of things were thrown at us it gave us a lot of challenges. The first one is to adapt your focus. So again, when we go over there, I read every book about German I could find, and that was listed in Fort Hood, Texas. And trying to learn about the culture. There were people that worked with us and worked with me that knew about the culture. And we did some research. We found that there was a congregation there. We just weren't prepared for it not working out. And so when we got over there and found out that we just can't bring our kids up in this very irreverent arrangement. So we started a congregation ourselves. And by the way, well, I think it's another point. I'll talk about it later. But so what we did is we focused on the Americans. And there was so many. We got calls from congregations in the States saying, little Johnny is at an Air Force base or an Army base. Do you know where he is? Yes, 30 minutes from us. So our congregation built as a result of that. Also, we were able to focus on reaching out within the community. There was a community paper. We worshiped with one other family in Würzburg, Germany, and they were down in Stuttgart. It's about 70 miles away, 45-minute drive on the Autobahn. But the man and the family that was down there, some of you may know him, is this Bob and Therese Mano, who now he is an elder in Brandon. They had a small congregation in Stuttgart, and we had one in Würzburg, and so we met once a month. But the first thing that we were not expecting to do is to refocus our efforts. And by the way, that's what the Apostle Paul seemed to do. He would go in and he would find out all these different, here he is in Philippi, went to the riverside where he met a certain lady from Thyatira he did not know he would meet. And there is again that congregation. The congregation also included the Philippian jailer, if you remember. And what Paul writes in 1 Philippians is, don't feel sorry for me that I've been thrown into this situation, because as a result of it, I have been able to reach people that I wouldn't normally be able to do. And so that's the first lesson, I think, that we learn is you don't have to be a preacher to have a responsibility to teach. Take your job and go. The second point is the autonomy of a young church. And again, as I mentioned, we were a congregation of Liz and I. I was 29, she's 26. And after we got to Bitburg, it was a few years later, there was 2 or 3 families there. I was preaching in at our living room, and I'll talk about that in a second. And it was an Air Force base, so 2 of the men that were associated with the Air Force, one family was gone, another one, the lady was there, the man was working. So sitting on the couch was just this other lady and her 2 children, and then Liz and our 2 children, Randy and Will. This lady gets up while I was talking and attends to one of her children. The other child leaves. Liz now takes Randy out. And there's my 6-year-old son. You have to adapt. And you figure out. But what we did during this time is we took an advantage of saying and teaching our children, this living room that we wrestle in with the night before, we play hide and seek, we throw pillows when mom's not watching, and we do all of these other things. On Sunday morning, we rearrange the furniture, we put a podium up, and it is a reverent place. And it's not about the place except for we wanted our children to know it's different. And so you teach your children. Our children had a hard time leaving the familiarity they had with these small congregations. I remember when our daughter came to Florida College, she was with the congregation in Mainz, and she called and she said, she was really frustrated because there wasn't a congregation like hers, and she questioned What are all these elder things about, She had to learn. But it was a congregation of a family that really took care of themselves. And so when you're over there, you don't have a choice. You've been given some work, you preach the word. And huge fell on my shoulders. And by the way, no internet. The phone call I couldn't call my dad, who was an elder back in Oklahoma. Couldn't call Ed, couldn't call other people. We had Steve Wallace, a few folks that would encourage him. But your knowledge and your Bible study was what you had. I had some commentaries and I had a lot of study. It just took a different role. Regroup as a family. And I tell you what, if you have an opportunity to take your family out of this world, this U.S. world, and go somewhere, it was a great thing for our family. The third is knowing what you don't know, and I will finish quickly. What we found out quickly is that it doesn't matter how often you've gone to India. It doesn't matter how often you've gone to any of these places. You don't know the culture. And we depend on the Indians like Surinder and Bernard's dad, V.J. Benson, to help us when we are interviewing preachers. Just a side note to see, when we had working with the congregation in Germany, it was about, I guess it was in 2016 or 17, when it was just Africans, no Germans, just Africans and Americans is all that congregation is made up in. When an American would come in and want to place membership, the Africans would tell the Africans, don't be part of this. We're going to talk to him. You don't understand. You're going to accept everything they say. Because when an African would come in, we'd be so excited, and they would say, you don't know. And so they would set the Americans aside, and they would get in, and their meetings would be really long. And they would come out, and they'd say, yeah, he doesn't need to place membership. And we did that arrangement because we don't know the culture. And the last thing, this is just a list of, it's at the end of congregations that are, cultures that are listed. These are all Jews, by the way, of course. The last point that I want to make is everyone needs encouragement. And if you know people that are overseas and you haven't written them a note for a while, it just take some time, send them a note. Read their reports that sent them to you. It is really, really encouraging. Jimmy's on this island that's 15 miles long, 5 miles wide. And I said, Jimmy, do you want me to say anything to this group of people? He said, they don't need an invitation. Come see us. Okay, I'm going to end this and just say that we all have responsibilities, so please take your opportunities. All right, thank you. I think I ended on time. Thank you. Yeah, hey.
Taking pictures and texting them to Andrea.
Okay,
As
good.
you were speaking.
Yes, exactly.
Seychelles, she's in Germany right
Okay, is she really? Okay. Well, I saw you over there. I want to say you want to come up and talk. Yeah, but anyway, yeah, it's a.
now. Great. Your
Okay.
mic is still on.
Oh, yeah. Oh, thank.